Hello, peoples. It's time again. We are back for our bi-weekly. I don't know. I don't think that's the right word for that. I keep saying that, and I don't think it's right. But anyway, we're back again, and as you can see, we're doing Changeling tonight. And we have a new person, and I don't want to say an old person because he's liable to get mad at me. But one of our ongoing guests. But let's throw this out to Sarah first. Sarah, Brian, say hi.
Hi.
And of course, brother Victor, love to have you back, man. Thanks.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And of course, my brother Jake.
Hello, hello.
And tonight we are doing Changeling the Dreaming Shadow Court. We're going to focus as much on the Shadow Court as we can, but you know how this shit works. We will be tangenting. It happens. We can't help it. It just does. That's the whole organic flow of the conversation, and I like it like that. So, Brother Jacob, if you want to... that veteran guest, that's a good name. Thank you, Sabrina.
Veteran. There you go.
Veteran, I can live with that.
Victor's a veteran.
All right. I will try to remember that one. So, Brother Jacob, let's do this.
All right, well, I'm going to start off on a side tangent before we get to the topic on hand. Just because I was just curious, because I saw today that there was a posting that they updated the World of Darkness website again. And when it first dropped, I went in, I made an account, and then they had another update, and I went back and checked, and I was just kind of feeling underwhelmed. So I was just curious if any of you guys have been keeping up with seeing what their updates are. Is the page kind of moving towards something a little bit more usable, or is it something that just is kind of laying off?
Page?
Yeah.
I honestly haven't paid a whole lot of attention to it because it seems so vampire-centric right now. And that's not really my bag. Like, I'm okay with some of vampire, but I'm not a vampire player by trade. So I'm kind of waiting to see what the book looks like when it comes out and see what rules I can harvest and scavenge off of and rifle through the pockets of.
That's the way we do this.
Yeah, I made an account when it first started to see using, and I kind of thought about putting a chronicle up, but it really boiled down to I need at least as much functionality as a Facebook group. And that's a high bar.
Oh, yeah,
that's a high bar. But, I mean, whether or not that's an attainable thing for them, as a consumer, I get this thing for free. All my friends are on Facebook.
All the groups are already there.
Yeah, well, and see, like, my thing, like, it seemed to be very LARP focused, which, I mean, is fine. And the part of it is supposed to try to encourage all the different LARP troops to be somewhat more connected. But, like, I was trying to upload the specifics about the LARP game that I'm ST for, and it's a vampire game, and like Sarah said, it's very vampire-centric, but there still wasn't enough options there for me to actually input everything for the setting, and it didn't really seem like there was really much there that was usable at the time, at least, unless like all of my players got accounts and uploaded their character sheets, and then I could use the World of Darkness site to check their character sheets. And that kind of seemed to be the only functionality at the time. And that, you know, like Victor said, I mean, Facebook groups are already very handy. I know our troop, we make pro boards for our LARP games where, you know, for communications and stuff. And again, it's something that's has quite a few different functions available. Like, I mean, I do downtime scenes on our boards, for goodness sakes, in between the actual live games. So I wasn't sure if anybody had seen any of the more recent updates to see what new functionality has gone on. So I'll do that for some homework and before our next episode then to see if where they're sitting at things available for us and whether it's at the point where people can start making a little bit more use of it or not.
Well,
I was just curious if anybody else had taken a peek at it.
Well, technically speaking, the next show is Vampire, but we're doing Infernalists, so...
Well, I think that'll cover more than just Vampire, I'm sure. But.
Yeah. But I mean,
right.
when most people say Infernalist, the one of your favorite clans pops to mind every single time.
Yeah, everybody usually thinks Bali, and then they think Nefandi, and I know Nefandi aren't technically Infernalists, but everybody I talk to, when you talk about Infernalists, they always think of Nefandi.
I mean, there are a lot of Infernalism. There are a lot of Infernalists there, but they're not all Infernalists.
No. Yeah, right.
These next few shows were this show too. Well, no, I forgot 2 weeks ago as well. Is Jake wanted to do bad guys, and that's actually kind of hard to do with.
But it's so much fun. The villains get the best toys.
Yeah, the bad guys get the best toys.
Well, look at the Empire. Come on, they've always had the coolest equipment.
Yeah, they have armor that doesn't block worth shit. Soldiers that can't shoot. They can be taken out by cavemen teddy bears. I'm not sure they got the best toys out of the deal.
They look cool. Let's put it that way.
Yes, they look cool.
They might be an outlier there, but in White Wolf, a lot of the time, some of the villain organizations are some of the more meaty, narratively interesting ones. I really like the Black Spiral Dancers. So
yeah, they got brought up quite a bit on the last show because of the the whole worm thing.
Yeah.
In general, in this particular group of games, finding a bad guy is hard to do, really is, because somebody is a bad guy to somebody else. It doesn't really matter which way you go with it.
That's true.
The she are bad guys to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Oh, Jacob just trying to piss everybody off. I say that I've certainly thrown that bomb down enough times.
Red cap for life. I'm not going to pull any punches against the she. So
I love
what are they going to do about
so much?
They're my favorite. Red caps are absolutely my favorites. I don't know if anybody here ever used the old Shadow and Essence forums, but on the Changeling board for that a million years ago, they did everybody gets to kind of pick which kith they want highlighted for this week and have sort of themed contests and themed content. And when it got to red caps, nobody wanted to do it. And I'm just like, give it to me. Right. I'll do it. My hand's up.
That's right. I'll put them both up if you need
me to. Man, red caps are so popular.
I know.
That was a very she-centric group. And so I understand why no one wanted to do it. And I was just over there being the one lone commenter going, yes, please.
Privilege and pointy ears.
Yeah. Colonialism and Manifest Destiny. And
Now, I don't know, and if it comes up as a tangent a little bit later on, there's one word we don't use in the channel. Sarah, you wouldn't know this. It starts with a T.
Okay.
It's the bad guys for mage. Shh. Don't say it.
The technocracy?
Right.
Yeah, there. You're just inviting it. You're inviting it, Peter.
I was going to say, I gathered as much from that, but I didn't want to upset anyone.
If the stream crashes, I know who to blame. There you go.
Yeah, I'm also the guy where when I worked tech, I made a point of saying Macbeth at least once during the run of every show I did.
Absolutely. Now, that I'll do.
Yeah.
Because Noah, you're not the only one. Remember, Eric's mentioned it on more than one occasion that he's used that particular
Macbeth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just get it out in the open.
So yes, it just seems to be See, even the people in the channel know what's up. They know that particular word is verboten. But anywho, let's get back to the Shadow Court, folks. So All right. You
So
still
prior
have
to the
you
show,
still have your question, dude. Go.
Yeah. So prior to the show, both of you made comments that I'm going to give you a chance to expand upon. So Sarah, you mentioned that you can't talk about the Shadow Court without talking about the other courts. So I'll kind of get you to do a summary of each of the different courts and how they kind of relate to each other. And Victor, you said that there's 4 different versions of the Shadow Court. So I'll get you to expand on that once Sarah kind of gives us a primer on the courts of the Fae.
Okay. What you are asking for is possibly slightly impractical because the different editions treat the different courts in a different way. To an extent.
Okay, so give us some, for instance.
But the general consensus is, let me think of a way to put this. The Seelie Court is really interested in preserving glamour and staving off winter, which is the Changeling sort of byword for the apocalypse. It's what happens when everything falls into stagnation, and banality rules in total and whole. They want to preserve glamour. They want to foster it. They're kind of hoping for an 11th hour Hail Mary to usher in the resurgence of summer, which is the prior age to our current autumn age in modern Changeling. And they're hoping that this kind of 11th hour Hail Mary is going to save everybody. But kind of, it seems almost sort of contrary to that. They're very staunchly traditionalistic. They're autocratic. Their rulership is autocratic. They value community and harmony and honor and the rule of law very highly, much more so than individualistic freedoms. But the way that Changeling is framed, it places them as the good guys. So if you're making the autocrats the good guys, then what do the bad guys look like?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
And then the Unseelie Court kind of, they're in a position where they are a lot less optimistic about this. They don't want winter to come, but they're kind of almost in a position where they're feeling like it's inevitable. That things are getting bad, that we're not really going to turn this thing around. So get what you can while you can. Go and get that glamour. Go and take what you want. They're very individualistic. They're very personal freedoms oriented. They don't mind the idea of communities because there are Unseelie communities like Corbies of red caps and stuff. And obviously the Unseelie court structure where there are Unseelie nobles and their vassals and stuff. But the commoners in particular tend to value individual freedom and autonomy a lot.
So how often does the Stark House quote pop up in those?
Oh, winter is coming?
Yes.
That actually gets more towards the Shadow Court. They're basically not only, well, certain versions of the Shadow Court. Different versions of the Shadow Court do different things differently. The way that I commonly prefer to run the Shadow Court, and Victor may agree, is that they kind of accept that winter is coming, and that it needs to come, and to let it come and fulfill that natural cycle element, the Seelie Court has to be deposed from their uncontested rule. So what they want to do is kind of take down the Seelie Court, and destabilize that, and kind of let nature take its course. And in that, they kind of want to armor themselves against the banality, because if winter's coming, banality is going to be a big deal. They want to try to find a way to insulate themselves to survive it, and kind of build an armor for themselves out of this.
Victor,
and that armor piece is where things get weird, because their first write-up, their armor for banality is banality. So that's fun to chew on.
Yeah,
I gotta take me a second to wrap my head around that one. Okay.
Yeah, they want to armor themselves against the thing that will kill them with the thing that will kill them, and they want to weaponize it, basically. Which, I mean, Changeling does allow for banality to be weaponized anyway, but they are pushing it really hard. We actually had a game that we ran many years ago with a Changeling ST of mine, where we accidentally stumbled upon a freehold that was basically being controlled by the Unseelie, who were members of the Shadow Court, and they were working with the Thalane, which are some of the big bads in Changeling.
Okay,
and
why haven't they come up before now, dude? And I'm talking to Victor. Or have you mentioned
because
them?
I've mentioned them. They'll come up in this episode because they're in, I think, every version of the Shadow Court. I don't know where BNS is ultimately going with theirs. They haven't done the Thalane yet, but with every previous version of the Shadow Court, the Thalane are a major fixture.
Yeah, the Thalane are sort of the big bads. The idea in Changeling cosmology goes back to the Tuatha and the Fomorians went to war with each other. Yeah, yes. They went to war basically for the nature of reality. Depending on which version of canon you read, the Fomorians are sort of chthonic horror from beyond the beyond. They're fear from before humans. And their children, the Thalane, are sort of an analog to the Kithane, the core playable character types in Changeling.
Okay. All right. Now I'm understanding better. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The Thalane are interesting, but that's a later part of the conversation.
Yeah, let's go back to where you were at. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to tangent
you. But in this particular story arc, what had been written in by my ST who like to torture us was
that in the job description, yo?
Yeah.
Just saying.
We accidentally stumbled upon, were captured by this freehold, for lack of a better term, but it was so banality soaked. They were getting close to their goal of trying to turn banality into something they could sustain themselves on. They were doing experiments on Kithane that they could capture, and on Chimera they could capture, to try to force them to build resistances to banality, to basically armor themselves against it. And it was bad. It was an internment camp.
Just from what I understand from Victor, that means they would lose their powers, and I'm using quotes here, by the way, with that, if that were the case.
So there's a thing there. If you dive into the history in Changeling, and this involves, well, you don't even really need to use the prequel material. The history of Changeling was, you have these huge, ridiculous true fae, and they're potential incarnate. And then at some point, the world cooled, and they became the fairies that you see in the Dark Ages, and they wrapped themselves in stories. That has a lot more specificity in Exalted, if you treat Exalted as a prequel. And the way they wrote that is, we're absolute potential, but to interact with the world, we have to reduce ourselves. We have to take on a little bit of banality and a little bit of shape, but they hated it. And so it's kind of the same thing that happens later, and then down the road, they become even less and more defined, and then they start, mating with humans, and you get Kinane, and that's kind of a step in that direction. And then the shattering happens, and they curl up inside of humans, which is wrapping yourself up in this mortal autumn world. The thing I always wanted them to do with that whole armor ourselves in banality, which of course all the other fae are like, oh no, that's abomination. I really wanted a book that really, really called out the fact that, like, this is what we've always done and you're all hypocrites. I wanted that so hard.
I actually
we're
really
just
like
doing it again.
Because that's basically their trend that they've followed this whole time. if you look at the prequel materials, and I happen to like using the prequel materials as part of the history of Changeling. It's not strictly necessary, but some of the Graceful Wicked Masks and Dark Ages Fae stuff tends to lend itself to that, where it's like all we've been doing is finding ways to put ourselves in smaller and smaller boxes, so that way we can survive what's happening to the world. And now the Shadow Court's trying to find smaller and smaller boxes and not just shove themselves in it, but find ways to kind of weaponize that.
Oh.
Yeah, I always wanted a Shadow Court Dantean, like not C20 Dantean, the old Dantean. I wanted a whole story there about, the Dantean are written up as these ridiculous, banal, abomination changelings. But what if there's the next step? And
I actually really like that.
Yeah. Material, the Fae that are the closest to their source in whatever that time period is, the closest to true Fae, always kind of had disdain for the Fae that were farther along this path towards structure. And so the relationship the Cathane have to, first, second edition Dantean still follows that model. And that would be an amazing source of horror for a bunch of Cathane players to have that unfold.
That would actually be a really interesting game.
And if you haven't brought this up to anybody who may, and don't tell me you can't get access to somebody who might be writing the new Changeling, you might want to bring it up. Both of you.
I won't say I haven't had a couple conversations with a couple people, but I don't have that much influence.
Influence ain't got shit to do with it. A good idea is a good idea.
The Changeling forums on Facebook involve a lot of softballing ideas and people bouncing stuff off each other, and the developers are remarkably involved in the Changeling forum. So it's nice to talk with them about it.
Not just Changeling, by the way.
Yes, that's true. I just happen to be more active in the Changeling board. I'm
Girl,
active
you post everywhere.
More there.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I post there more than anywhere.
Okay, because I see a lot of your stuff when you post now that you're one of my friends. And but I'm not a member of the Changeling group because Changeling just wasn't my thing.
That's okay.
And that's cool. No, but I'm learning more about this thing, and I'm starting to believe that Changeling is one of the most dire situations in the entire White Wolf history.
I had that conversation with a friend of mine who plays vampire, and he was like, I just don't understand Changeling. It's too bright and it's too pretty. And I'm like,
what the hell have you been smoking?
It's this candy-coated kernel of existential dread.
Well, and that's what my joke in the ad is that there's so many people that have that perspective, and as I mentioned, Victor has been very quick to set that straight a couple years ago. When we first had him on talking
shit
Changeling.
Is depressing, man. I have actually come out of the Changeling shows very upset.
and I can understand it because I've even I have the rule book. I've even played the game with people that are a lot more into Changeling than me, and I still walked away from it thinking that it was kind of the World of Darkness light. So I totally get how people would see that. So I've always enjoyed the conversations from those of you guys that are past that point that you can highlight where the nihilistic dread is in the game.
It's horrible.
Yeah,
it really is. It really makes Gehenna look like things are going great.
Well, and I think a lot of people pick up Changeling, and it isn't one. It's hard to see when you first open the book, but it's hard to tap the horror themes in Changeling in a game. They're there.
Why?
It's difficult to get in the headspace. I think it's easier for storytellers to craft it and figure it out, but it is hard for players.
You're structuring.
I've had a lot of. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say you're structuring an adventure environment, an adventure scenario around well, I get to go and do all these amazing things and fight the dragon, but then I get a phone call saying that mom's back in the hospital, and how do I deal with being hit by the fact that reality outside of this bubble I've created to keep myself safe and warm actually exists and it wants to eat me? Like, how do you make that work?
But I think it was after our first Changeling show with Victor, I was like, oh my God, this is so fucking depressing. What the hell, man? I said, I thought Werewolf was bad, or Wraith for that matter. Wraith is depressing as fuck, but it's happier than this.
I mean, it depends on how you play it. Like, the description I heard from Matt McFarlane that I really like, I did a text interview with him right before C20 came out, is he described it as Changeling is someone putting a gun to your head, screaming at you to be happy, and if you ever stop being happy, they'll pull the trigger. Like, that's Changeling. Like, if you're playing it right, your characters are all playing manic to an extent. They're doing that. And it's hard as a human to be in that headspace and to constantly be aware of the fact that you're role-playing a coping mechanism. And
role-playing a coping mechanism. Oh my God, that's awesome. Hello?
Yeah, it's... Oh, yep. Yeah, it's
dead air.
Just,
we don't do dead air.
Really difficult. Sorry. It's really difficult to keep people... It's one thing to talk about it when you're making characters, especially with new people, about this is the world, this is what you're being presented with. But to keep people in that space, in that tension for a game session, and if you're doing a long-form campaign for several game sessions, can be really difficult. It really stretches your role-playing skills.
Okay.
But it's a lot of fun if you can stomach that kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things that's most important with Changeling is being willing to fail. Like, honestly, the last session in my Changeling campaign, it didn't go well. I tried to do something really experimental and, like, push the edge of you're having remembrance about past lives that are past lives that your current life, like, you now would loathe and disgust, and what are you going to do with that? And my players just went... I can't roleplay that. I'm sorry, man. Like, I can't. Like, what am I doing with this? And it was worth trying. I'm glad I tried it. I now know it doesn't exactly work, at least not with my players.
Okay.
That sounds like something I'd really like to play, though.
So, but how, as a storyteller, do you instill that dread wrapped in a colorful candy shell, as you put it?
Dolls.
What I tend to do is I have extended conversations about the themes and the tone, and kind of how the themes and tone of Changeling can relate to systems that, especially if it's someone that is coming to me from a different White Wolf system, it's how can the themes and tone of this relate to what you've currently been doing, and what's different and what's the same, where can you find common ground, and then have that conversation with them, and then run at least one pre-session to kind of help them understand what's expected of them and what's expected of the game. I'm actually starting up a new C20 campaign next week. And we've been having sit-downs for character creation and running session zeros and stuff for everybody. And a friend of mine who is primarily a werewolf player is playing a boggin in this, which was against type.
I can feel that.
It was not what I expected for him to play. I wholeheartedly expected him to want a troll, but
no, I can actually feel the boggin thing going on. Yeah, I do, especially from a werewolf player.
I can appreciate that if you're talking about the
werewolf over the last 2 years, and I'm learning they're not always, furry death machines. There is some other shit going on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on under the surface. This particular player tends to play combat heavy werewolf, though. So that was kind of why I was expecting that of him.
Oh, okay.
but he decided he wanted to try something different and kind of stretch a bit, and I was really pleased. But we had to have conversations about, okay, werewolf has a lot of dread and a lot of hopelessness, but you ain't seen nothing.
No. Like I said before, Changeling is the most depressing of the lines. Well, it really is.
And I mean, I think the other thing that's important is to take your players and remind them that they cannot play this game to win. They have to play this game. Like, winning Changeling does not mean your character wins. It means you get influence over the narrative. You get to have plot cookies. You get to have moments in the spotlight. But it's like, you have to kind of think about Changeling characters the way actors think about parts. Actors don't want the part that, like, the character that wins and everything is wonderful and they never suffer, because there's nothing for them to dig into. You know, my first game, like, it was my first game session in the current Chronicle. You know, one of the players would kind of wanted to do something intense, and they were trying to figure out how to lower their difficulty. And I'm like, you could take nightmare dice. And they were like, no, absolutely not. And I was like, oh, you can't play Changeling like that. The first time I gave them a banality trigger. Yeah.
No, but what you said about the actors getting their teeth into something, Jack Nicholson, when he did the Joker, was he really had to, he went and spent time in, you know, and he had actually, back during the days of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he had gone to a mental hospital, but he had gone back again, you know, to do some research. And there are quotes in that one too. And he just, you know, it's like, oh my God, this guy is so messed up. So how do I do that? And that's what I'm getting out of this is that, so it's not a game you win, it's how you just make it along. This is how we do this, and if I get through it, great. If I don't, whatever.
Yeah, it's the story that you tell in the end that's much, much more important than whether or not you made it out the end alive or sane or whole.
Yeah.
It's what you want to do is be able to reflect on that story. And it's a game about games. It's a game about narratives. And winning it means that you're playing a game where you're telling a good story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. And
So
that matters regardless of which of the splats you use. It's all about the story. It isn't really so much about whether your character survives. It's whether or not you had a good time playing.
Yeah. So I want to jump back to the question that Jake said he wanted me to jump on, that we kind of got away from, and that's the many different faces of the Shadow Court. We talked about the first edition, like the first printing one, that's from the Shadow Court book. And to explain why there have been so many different Shadow Courts, I feel like I kind of have to give a short, like, elevator pitch review of that book, because that book is an experience.
You almost, it sounded like somebody twisted your arm to say that.
I have a hard time talking about this book. It has one of my favorite fiction pieces in the entire line in it, and everything after that fiction piece shouldn't even have that title. So there's this opening fiction piece about these two she brothers. One of them is Seelie, and one of them is Unseelie and was cast out by his brother. And the Unseelie, she is a member of the Shadow Court. And something to mention about that. So he's Unseelie, and he's a member of the Shadow Court. The Seelie and Unseelie courts are cosmological constants. They are magical affiliations that were woven into the names of the Fae centuries ago. And it's kind of dealt with a little bit in Dark Ages Fae when they talk about your saning
but
and your
don't the
saint
Fae
into a court.
predate humanity? So it would
Well,
even
they'd
be
like to
further
tell themselves
back.
that. The courts are part of that whole giving structure. Unreliable narrator. Like, so here's the other thing. If you take all the unreliable narrator from every other game in the World of Darkness and you compact it down into a single game line and you triple it, You've almost hit Changeling Unreliable Narrator. You're close. Like, like the other games contradict each other, and there's a general sense of, well, maybe this is his lens. Changeling is explicit about it. Like, there's a line in Changeling 2nd Edition after they talk about Arcadia. The Arcadia, it shows up everywhere. Arcadia, the home of the Fae, the place we all came from, where we're trying to get back to, the Promised Land. And then there's just like, or Arcadia could just be another story the Fae tell themselves.
And a plug,
who knows?
Walking away from.
Like, well, actually, that wasn't. Like, that's the quote from the book. Like,
no, I'm saying, and a plug, walking away from.
But at some point, the Fae, in that process of reducing themselves that we were talking about, started giving themselves names. And names are structure, and names are form. And then they started tying those names into organizations. And it magically defined who and what they were. It was part of the whole wrapped in a story thing.
Don't the Fae have the whole true name thing going on?
Yes, they do. And that's part of this whole thing. But the Seelie and Unseelie courts are part of that whole magical defined working. The Shadow Court, in every form that it's ever taken, is just an organization. It's not a magically enforced aspect of fairy nature. So, so there's this opening story about, these two Shi, and this Unseelie Shi is a member of the Shadow Court, and it's Samhain Eve. And on Samhain Eve, all the Seelie become Unseelie. But then the mists come in at the end and wipe away their memories of that night when they are Unseelie. And I could do a whole episode on, like, that.
All right.
But in that moment when they're telling all of these secrets that they're not really going to remember, the Unseelie Shi tells what the Shadow Court is, and it's that whole wrap ourselves in banality to survive the long winter. The rest of that book is an Unseelie book. It's just a book about the Unseelie. And it has a few Thelane, and it has, like, maybe 2 pages total after that story that directly deal with the Shadow Court. And so it was very underdeveloped, like that idea.
It seemed like towards the end there was
banality.
a little bit of, oh, fuck it, we're not going to be bothered with this after next year.
That's a first ed book. That is an early, height of the line book.
Okay, my bad.
No, that's one of the full color early days extravaganzas. It was just implemented really weirdly. And so most players looked at this idea of, we're fairies, we want to wrap ourselves in banality to protect ourselves from banality. And went, that doesn't make any sense. Because they didn't flesh it out with, like, all that stuff that Sarah and I were talking about a few minutes ago. We all kind of had to... All the people I know where that pitch for the Shadow Court makes sense, they've had to build it all themselves. Like, it's not actually written anywhere.
Oh.
So... that version gets mentioned again in the second ed core book, but it's like 2 sentences. And so that's version 1 of the Shadow Court. Then the Shining Host LARP book comes out. And they don't invoke that banality thing at all. The Shining Host LARP book tells this story about how the Fae used to go down this bright road. And it was the trod to end all trods. And the Fae could walk down this bright trod and renew themselves. No description of what renew means, but there are some hooks from Exalted Fairfolk about what that would be, having to do with questing into Unshaped. And so I'm pretty sure it's a hook to that whole process, but that might just be headcanon. So Changeling, since going into humans, if they go down the bright road and they can still open the gateway to it, they never come back. And the Shadow Court is kind of presented as this cult that worships the bright road and opens it and throws changelings into it. Like, they're sacrificing things to the bright road to some end that no one truly understands. And so they're this very maniacal, conspiratorial kind of cult angle, which is cool in a LARP setting. Like, the weird esoteric thing that the old tabletop Shadow Court would never work in LARP. So... you have this weird bright road reshaping engaging with parts of fairy that are now toxic to changelings version. So that's version 2. Then C20 came out, and in C20 they did this thing where
that sounded like serious pain.
So bad. There. They present them. They present them as this weird, like, progressive. They list them as inspiring Occupy and Black Lives Matter, and
oh dear God,
and the Arab Spring, and so. But here's the thing: they still show up as a nefarious force throughout the book, and there's a secret court of Thalain pulling the strings from behind the scenes. And I actually saw something posted about this recently. So the court of Thalain inside the Shadow Court in C20 is called the Black Court. That's an invocation to an apocalypse prophecy from one of the last Changeling books before the line was canceled that dealt with the courts of the Fomorians, the White Court, Red Court, and Green Court, I think. And there was something about there's a mythical Black Court that will not see the light of day until basically the world is ending and we're riding into the final winter. And that's why he made the Thalain at the center of the Shadow Court this Black Court. If you have the Shadow Court written up as pure villains, that's kind of cool. If you have them inspiring Black Lives Matter, Occupy, and the Arab Spring, that's
yeah.
I
actually like problematic.
It is deeply problematic.
Yeah, but to be honest, White Wolf has always tried to add political weirdness to the game lines. They always have.
Political weirdness is good, but making the bad guys, ostensibly the bad guys, air quotes, social justice movements is maybe not the best idea.
No. So I actually am running a C20 game, and I have a plot that has taken that kernel and completely turned it on its head to try to reshape it into something that I think works. There was a running theme during Occupy and Black Lives Matter when they were really, really big and active protests were happening on a regular basis, where there would be hired violent protesters who would come in, pose as parts of the movement, and incite violence so
flip
that
cars
violence
over,
would be blamed on...
set shit on fire, yeah.
And in almost every case, I won't say every case because someone will come up with the one fringe example of someone who's actually associated, but in the vast, vast majority of those cases, when people looked into it, it's like, oh, this person did this on purpose to subvert the movement. Now, if you take the Shadow Court and you frame them in that space, I am fine telling that story. I am not fine having them actually have inspired those core movements. No.
Yeah, being in a position where you're basically saying that the good guys are an autocracy and the bad guys are here for social justice and individualism, that makes my skin crawl.
Yeah, I feel you, girl. I do, man.
What is it they say? The devil was the first one to demand equal rights?
Yes, he was. Yeah. Better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven, yo.
I'm on board with you guys. I'm not like, I actually like the spin you put on it, Victor, because that makes like a lot of sense with what little I know about how the Shadow Court works. I could see where they might have thought, well, because they're trying to overthrow the autocracy of the Sealy Court, then it would make sense that they would want mortals to overthrow, But I'm actually surprised to hear that, because it does seem a little contrary to some of the directions that some of the other writers take things.
And I've actually seen the writer who wrote that segment engage with people about what he was thinking when he wrote it. I can say with some confidence, the way that it reads on its surface was not his intent. That's very clear to me from conversations I've seen him engage in. So I don't want to rip on the developers.
No,
of the
yeah,
writers
right.
here,
No, you wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, there is that old saying about writing that, like, once you've written it and published it, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It's whatever it becomes in the world. Not a big fan of what this
But you have
becomes in the world.
also realize that no matter what the author, and I'm just going to throw this open for any author, was that their political ideology and or how they feel about whatever's going on will color whatever they're writing.
That's true. I genuinely think that it was a case of misunderstanding in this. The reader's misunderstanding the intent of the author's work in this instance. That said, I haven't spoken to anybody about this that doesn't agree with the "why are you making Black Lives Matter bad" angle.
Yeah, it wasn't bad, and it still isn't bad. It's like there are a lot of other political, especially with this Malkavian nut job we've got in the highest office in the land. Yeah, don't tell me there's not a Malkavian behind that crazy shit.
I don't.
I take offense.
You know
to
what?
that.
Actually, this is a great segue to the fourth form of the Shadow Court.
Oh, okay.
Because speaking of the pitch you talked about, so the fourth form of the Shadow Court is in the new By Night Studios Changeling edition, of which there's only an alpha slice, so we only really have the vaguest outline of what that's going to look like. But in the podcast that I co-run, that's all Changeling, Walking Away from Arcadia, we did an episode where we had a bunch of the writing crew on, and we talked about the alpha slice. And to be honest, they just straight up said, yeah, Trump Shadow Court. That's our inspiration.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm changing the wording very slightly. It was very close to that.
Okay.
You can go and listen. That's published.
I have heard a couple of your shows, and they're awesome, by the way.
Let's see. The specific description says, some say this court took the worst from both the Seelie and Unseelie courts and then unified these changelings behind a tyrannical leader dedicated to seeking complete control and fostering blind obedience.
And especially since this brother's talking about staying in office after 2024, I don't think so.
Anyway, like that's a rabbit hole I will get down when not like on a podcast about Changeling.
Right.
Yeah.
But
I personally try to separate, to an extent, real world politics and real world goings on and real world political figures from the supernatural elements in the World of Darkness. I know that at times in the World of Darkness they've written it in where, so and so was a Ventru or what have you. I try to make it so that the bad things that happen, the potentially arguably evil things that happen, are entirely human evil.
Yeah.
But part of the jihad
I like
is
that too.
the Methuselahs are influencing political agendas. And that's just using vampire, by the way.
They influence vampires and they influence vampire agendas. But
just
humans,
vampire.
the basic thing in World of Darkness, it really highlights the fact that humans are shitty pieces of garbage and we do terrible things to ourselves.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Which makes the jihad
in
easier.
the World of Darkness, it doesn't matter how big or powerful of a badass you are. Somewhere in the world, there's a group of humans that are going to fuck up your plans without even realizing it. There's a group of humans that will probably do something that will even make you take a second step back and go, that's a little hardcore. There's a group of humans out there who is probably going to be your downfall. That's the whole reason for the masquerade and all the other things where the supernatural creatures hide from humans, because humans are fucked up.
We're screwed up people in general. This the whole situation. But one of the things I was going to mention was Les Crane back in the early 70s did a song called Desert Errata. And one of the best lines in the entire thing, and it was a piece of poetry essentially, is there are always greater and lesser persons than yourself. And that goes for everything.
I really like how the World of Darkness emphasizes that humanity's belief system forms consensual reality, and how consensual reality will not under any circumstances be denied.
Did we
and
start talking
it shapes so much it shapes so much else. It shapes the fundamental nature of what the Cathane are, because they're shaped by the stories that were told about them over time.
Like Oberon and Titania and the whole deal.
To an extent, yeah. The Thalane, who are, again, they're kind of a segue into the Shadow Court, are also, I feel, shaped a bit more by human fears, like fears of othering and those kinds of things. They're shaped more by that than they are by like chthonic horror kind of stuff.
Okay,
like the text implies.
Go ahead, finish your thought, and then I have something here.
Okay, actually, that was pretty much it.
Okay.
It's just
I'm gonna go ahead, since we're coming up on the 1 hour mark. I'm gonna go ahead and do our shout outs. Thanks for you guys showing up for the live show. I really appreciate you. You know we love you at the show here. New Wave, my girl, she's awesome. She always has the best questions until now, apparently. And then Sabrina, of course. I've known that girl for over a decade. And Scott and Into the Darkness just posted a really cool question. Groups of humans sound very dangerous. How much XP do you get when you beat them, and what's their CR?
Well, I can't per se answer that question, but I know at one point in game we had to have slightly off topic, we had to have a conversation, stop and game, and figure out how much damage a red cap does as a club. That got interesting, but that's about the closest to that kind of question that I could answer.
Really? It would depend. Are you grabbing them by the ankles? Because then
his
they
arm
wouldn't...
came out of socket, and then they had to use his leg.
Okay, because I was wondering, like, if he's willing and you're grabbing him by the ankles, then he gets his bite damage on top of the club damage.
No, he was not willing.
Please,
a troll.
Please tell me the one wielding him. A troll. Good. That's where I was going.
It was a troll. It was actually my husband's character. And he got a hold of
what I've seen of him on video, he's very troll-like.
Yes. He stopped and looked at our ST and was like, I have no idea how to calculate damage for this. How much damage does a red cap do? And we stopped, and he had to go to the other room to stop laughing.
And yeah, Changeling.
That's the closest I come to being able to answer a question about what CR is a group of humans.
And our girl New Wave, she's going to try and come up with a Changeling question, but she's not very Changeling oriented. She's New Wave Masquerade. That's her name. So go figure.
I like to talk to people about Changeling that don't know about Changeling.
I know. That's why I'm doing this show. I'm be honest, is to learn about the splats of White Wolf that I have not played. And, Victor has put me hip to Changeling in a way that I never realized. I didn't realize it was the most dire and depressing fucking place to be in the World of Darkness. And
it can be.
Because I thought that was Wraith, to be honest, up until this point. Because
most people do.
I know, right? So
it's funny. The way I describe the difference between Wraith and Changeling is, with Wraith, you've bottomed out. You've hit rock bottom, and you have nowhere to go but up. And Transcendence is waiting there. With Changeling, you're keeping yourself in this like fevered, bright, like manic frenzy because you're looking down the hole and you can tell there isn't a rock bottom.
No.
There's a line from a song that I was listening to recently, and it's all your life you've been obsessing with the light, but the closer that you get, the further you have to climb. And in the music video, it's represented by this endless ladder going up to a light at the top, and it's clones of this man who are grabbing onto the one that's at the top, throwing him down, getting up so they can bask in the light for a moment, and then to be torn down again
I guess
by the one behind them.
Who is that?
And that it is from a group called Manchester Orchestra.
Okay.
And the name of the song is The Moth.
All right. Gotcha. I just made note.
And it very much reminds me of the reincarnation cycle with changelings.
So,
Yeah.
okay, have we covered the reincarnation cycle prior to now? Victor, you would know more better than I would, to be honest.
I don't know if we talked about it in like specifically. I can do a quick rundown of it. It's a little weird.
Go ahead, man. We got another hour. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, so the reincarnation cycle is when the shattering happened and all of the Fae went, holy crap, we're dying, all this banality is killing us. They curled inside of humans. No one knows exactly how that happened because no one can remember because Fae memory is for shit. But it seemed to be connected to what at that point were already called changelings, now are called Canaan, Fae-blooded humans. And at the time of the shattering, Fae-blooded humans could use the full magic of the Fae. They were much more powerful. And so they merged with these human but Fae-touched souls. And as those souls reincarnate, the whole Fae identity is along for the ride. And so they come back. They remember their past lives better than normal mortals do, but they don't remember them clearly. Like if you have a memory of a past life, like say there was some grand ball that happened in a past life and something significant happened there, you know, you might remember it, but the cultures will be wrong. Heck, maybe it happened in the High Dark Ages. You remember the Flapper's 20s, you know, story because you're somehow wrapped up in that story. The stories you become and get wrapped up in sort of overlay and reframe, but don't completely remove the truth from your memories. And so your remembrance is accessible but bizarre and incoherent and out of order. And that's a big reason why the Fae have all of this quote unquote history that they've collected from comparing memories with each other. And those memories aren't devoid of truth, but they're not really right.
Unreliable narrator.
Yeah, changeling, unreliable narrator. And so you get reborn. You don't always awaken as a Fae. You know, if you get reborn and that particular person is unlucky enough to grow up with autumn person abusive parents and they're never exposed to the necessary glamour to give their Fae soul that spark, you can live your whole life without ever reaching that potential. And different groups of Fae, depending on the cultures they're connected to, had long periods of history where almost none of them woke up. They were reincarnating, but things were just so terrible for them that almost none of them ever went through Chrysalis. And so how many Fae are actually active in the world as changelings ebbs and flows and changes and is different. Any reincarnation changes the story that the fairy's trapped in a little bit. And so that's where I was playing around with that. Oh, you're remembering these past lives. You kind of hate the person you're remembering. What do you do with that? Yeah, and so that's kind of the whole reincarnation cycle. On C20, there was the introduction that, like, the new Dauntain are Fae that really shouldn't be
them.
I love them so much.
I
miss
love
old
them
Dauntain,
so much.
like... I love banal changelings,
Yeah.
but I love the new Dauntain so much that I don't mind the rework. Because
When I read C20's Dauntain, I had a character that did a terrible thing at one point in a game, and we've already kind of established that he has reincarnated and is now an NPC in an existing other chronicle. And when I read the C20 Dauntain, it's like, I have to rewrite him as a Dauntain, because what he did shortly before he died, was such a terrible, egregious thing against the Dreaming and against the Fae, even though he meant well. It was real bad. Basically, what he did, what happened was, we'd been playing these characters for quite some time beforehand, and they had a lot of XP built up. He was a satyr, and he had a lot of soothsay, because I liked the whole Grecian narrative of a seer. And he had a fair bit of naming. And the game was set in North Texas, which is still, in Changeling terms, kind of a Wild West environment. And
there's a lot of werewolves out that way, I hear.
There are, but this actually involved the Nunehi. The count for the area was a child who had inherited a title from... He was a ward who had inherited a title from his master, who had an untimely death. And he had a regent in place who was not ruling properly, not ruling in the people's best interest, as the Sidhe tend to do. And in the process of that, he sort of redrew parts of the county lines to encroach in Nunehi territory, which is not good. They are not here for that. They suffer no fools from the Kithane at the best of times. They are the First Nations peoples in Fae terms, and they are they cover sort of the width and breadth of that and come in a variety of different forms. And
as Jake would say, the Wendigo. They're First Nations all the way.
But that would be werewolf, though, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying that using the First Nations, I'm trying to wrap my head around First Nations changelings, and it would be kind of like the Wendigo.
I mean, the Wendigo were still the same as other werewolves. The Nunyahi are different. They are pretty dramatically different, actually.
Oh, okay.
And
Hook a brother up.
So this Sidhe noble and his regents basically redrew the political boundaries and encroached on their territory, and they were not having it. They'd been ignored and treated badly for years because they sort of existed on their core existence was on reservation land, which is in a real place in that area. It's a place called Parker County in North Texas, named after a sort
Cherokee
of a Civil War.
Or
actually, I believe Quanah Parker was Sioux, the person that it was named for.
Okay.
That sounds right. I don't remember hearing about a big Cherokee presence in Texas.
I
but in Oklahoma, which is not too damn far away.
You get some Cherokee. That's mostly Blackfoot and Sioux in Oklahoma. I have a lot of family that lives in Oklahoma.
I mean, the Trail of Tears, that's where they sent them.
That's part of it, yeah. Some of it went through there. But anyway, what happened was they'd been encroached upon, and they felt violated, and they were going to retaliate. And our characters had been trying to sort of foster peace with them and had some connections that were now cutting them off and not interested in having conversations anymore. And my character looked at the situation, saw that they had sort of military leaders on their end that were taking things to an extreme level and wanting to go and start combat, which would negatively affect the commoners in the area that he'd been kind of trying to help and protect. So he decided to take matters into his own hands after having an unsuccessful conversation with the regent about it. And what he did was, C20 has introduced these things called banal changelings. They're changelings, not changelings, banal chimera, rather, that are basically chimera that are tainted by banality. And for that, they are that much stronger and scarier, especially if they can survive for any length of time.
Yeah.
This was before that existed. This was years ago. So it was kind of a homebrew thing. And we had just sort of encountered the wake of one passing at one point that had done terrible things. So what I did, what I decided that my character would do was a terrible thing And he performed a bunk that took days and days of fasting and ritualistic preparation and bloodletting and all the things. He saned the name of this beast and then used soothsay, which at its higher levels can change a thing's fate. You can go in and restring the threads of fate and make something do and be something other than what it should have been originally. Oh. So he sent this at them to basically discourage them. He had hoped that it would just essentially frighten them off, which was naive. But anyway, what happened is that it pretty much ate everybody in the encampment. And what he had not realized is that they had used the old tactic of circling their camp with their families. That was an old West tactic of
circling the wagons. Yeah,
circling the wagons. They had an encampment where their families, to a certain extent, were present, and so not only did this kill and eat their braves, who were in theory combatants who kind of sort of signed up for fighting things, even though they weren't fighting, but their children.
Oh, damn.
And their families. And he basically set off a weapon of mass destruction in an unsuspecting encampment.
Did somebody just ring a bell?
That was actually my phone.
Oh.
Sorry. It was bad, and I felt really bad about it afterwards. When I felt bad about it the whole walk up to it. I felt a lot like
more proof that this shit is depressing as hell.
That character should definitely be a Dante.
Yeah, that happened. He was someone that had been going he started off as a really nice kind of happy-go-lucky guy, but years of play and years of being ground down and gaining more banality. By this point, he was a grump and had a pretty high banality rating, and he just basically got to a point where he was, I'm going to save all of you, and I don't really care what it costs.
We have questions from the Peanut Gallery, by the way. From our resident question person, by the way. She seems to come up with really good questions for these shows. Let's start with the first one here, if you guys don't mind answering this for her. Okay, does Changeling mention anything about the Chiasid or the Magar?
I think the Chiasid make a brief appearance in C20. There's a section on them in the Prodigals section. Prodigals is the Changeling term for all the other supernaturals in the world. They call them Prodigals. They think all the other supernaturals were fairies that just forgot what they were. It's super egocentric, which is very fairy. And I'm pretty sure the Chiasid do make an appearance there. I don't know if the Maghar are called out explicitly, though. I know the Chiasid made appearances in some previous core books. Usually there's like a few paragraphs on them and like a stock NPC template.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember them ever being discussed explicitly in any depth or anything.
Yeah.
The second question from her is she's curious to know how iron or cold iron works in the game, and are there any weaknesses that the Changelings suffer from?
They suffer from a lot of weaknesses.
They're made of weaknesses. But cold iron, I mean, cold iron does exist, and it is a problem in the game. It is like silver to werewolves or sunlight to vampires. It does aggravated damage. You can't even carry it. So if you carry and wield a cold iron weapon yourself as a changeling, you take banana. And that's assuming you have gloves and everything so you don't come into physical contact with it. Because if it directly touches your skin, I think...
aggravated damage, yo.
I think it does do damage.
I don't
Sarah,
believe it did. There's a flaw in 2nd edition that you can take that's cold iron allergy, where it actually starts doing physical damage to you.
Okay, I thought it did.
They may have
chimerical
revised
damage.
it in 20. I honestly don't know. But
Okay.
you do take chimerical damage, but you don't take physical damage unless you have the flaw where you have functionally an allergy to it and it starts like blistering your skin off.
Yeah,
Oh.
I did remember that. Like, it doesn't again without the allergy like hurt your physical body, but it will do some damage, not a ton, but some damage to your fey body, unless you are a member of House Baelor. Members of House Baelor are partially for reasons. They're terrible, and they've been able to create chimerical cold iron in all of the horrible, like, abominable wrongness that is.
Yeah.
And they've begun a process of basically lining Trods with the stuff. There's a whole subplot where they're the masters of the Trods and pathways through the dreaming, and they've started to clad some of the Trods in chimerical cold iron.
Yeah.
Who knows why?
Just for funsies.
I think we have a new person in the channel, by the way, Cliff. I'm not sure if you've been with us before or not, but he has a question for you guys as well. This is, what recent video games would be good inspiration for a Changeling game?
Oh, let me think. I find Changeling themes in a lot of video games, if we're being honest. Even if it's not like a direct corollary, I can look at it and go, "Oh, this character is such a splat."
Yeah.
Or
Well, there's a lot in
this
that in
storyline
new
is
movies
very-
too. Just
Yeah, there's a
saying,
lot of
like
that in movies, too.
Hellboy 2. There's all kinds
Yeah.
of Changeling up in that bitch.
Hellboy 2
I
is
tend to
very
find
Changeling.
things from like things that you wouldn't think of as associating with that thing. It's this character you can pluck out, and their personality and their determinism and what have you would make them an excellent troll, or this person is an excellent red cap, or what have you. Video games in like the last, it's not a recent game, but of games in the last decade-ish, there's an indie game that was actually published by Ubisoft, but it was made by a third-party indie type game that I honestly can't remember the publisher, or not the publisher, the developer rather. And it was called Child of Light, and it's an RPG, and the entire game is done in watercolors, like all of the backgrounds and all of the character
Oh
design and
yeah, I
everything are
remember that one.
watercolor. And it's all animated watercolors. And the idea is this little girl. It kind of ties into the beginning of like real human conflicts as well. This little girl was the daughter. I want to say she was the daughter of like one of the Russian czars, and was killed, air quotes, killed, in her sleep to incite political conflict. And she wasn't really killed. She was thrown into the other place, which is described and presented very similarly to the near dreaming. Her spirit has been sent there, and she's trying to find her way back into her body to fix everything. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't realize that her body is dying. And the characters that you encounter are these horrific versions of... she encounters creatures that are distinct to this place, that belong here, that have their own narrative here. But the villains that she encounters are horrific versions of the people in her life that were abusive to her and the people that tried to kill her. Mm-hmm. And the whole game is you trying to overcome the trauma of what happened to you and see if you can struggle your way back to life.
Yeah, there are a couple games that people don't tend to think of as being Changeling games, but they kind of are. Much, much more like Thelaine, Fomorian angle on things. Silent Hill 2 and 3.
Yes, Silent Hill
Really?
is a very good inspiration for
Yeah, I was
Changeling.
thinking. I was
It's
It's an
thinking of
older
Silent
game though.
Hill,
That's why I
too.
didn't go with it at first because they were
Yeah.
talking about recent games. But yeah,
Yeah.
Silent Hill.
I've only
Particularly
really
Silent Hill
played
music.
Shattered Memories, and that just gave me a whole feel of the darker side of Changeling, as you guys have described it.
Silent Hill 2 is my favorite in the series. The Room is
Yeah.
excellent, but 2 is just a masterclass.
New Wave said The Wolf Among Us, and I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's actually I like the Fable comic that The Wolf Among Us is based on, and that's a really good kind of subverted fairy tales
Yeah.
angle for it.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple. I kind of want to throw a couple newer things out that aren't necessarily video games. If anyone has seen Star Evil, it, similar to Changeling, starts out very like bright and chipper and manic, and then there are like weird things going on that they don't fit, and then it gets real dark, but it stays manic.
Yeah, Star is really good for a slightly more mellow take on that because Star is so manic and it's so everything's a million miles an hour. But another good Changeling cartoon that still gets pretty manic because of some of the characters in it, but as a whole, tonally, it's not as manic as Star, is Gravity Falls.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Super Changeling.
I'm actually borrowing pretty heavily from Gravity Falls for the game that I'm running, that I'm going to be starting here shortly, that I was talking about earlier.
And if you're willing to go a bit off the beaten path to end remembrance dynamics, When the Cicadas Cry or Higurashi no Nakokoro ni, I think gets into a lot of the interesting identity and remembrance stuff. It's not so much the chimerical reality fairy part of it, but I still draw some inspiration, especially from what gets revealed about what's really going on in season 2, and it puts a lot of things in focus.
New Wave
there's a modern...
posted Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask.
That's a possibility. Majora's Mask deals with a lot of, particularly if you take the sort of a lot of my, like, let's look at Zelda and compare it to Changeling is less Majora's Mask and more the Ocarina of Time, because of some of how it could be interpreted to deal with grief and loss.
Oddly enough, the only Zelda game I played was the first one, the gold NES cartridge.
Another good game that borrows in some parts from the ideas of predeterminism and inevitability, and what an autocracy can do, even if it's like a well-intentioned autocracy, what it can do if you're looking at what the Seelie are to Changeling. There's a game called We Happy Few. That deals a bit with that, and it's everybody's going to be happy all the time, and you have to take your medicine to make you happy all the time, and you can be very easily identified and called out and hunted if you don't. Another good one is BioShock.
Which one, though?
Infinite plays with determinism a lot.
Yes,
and I
it
like
does,
that.
And that's my favorite of them. That's why I asked.
My favorite is actually 2.
2, really?
Yeah, 2 is my favorite because it deals with this really fractured, toxic parent-child, ward and protector relationship.
The whole big daddy, little sister thing,
particularly the relationship with I'm going to make you perfect, and I'm going to make you beautiful and shoulder all the burdens of humanity and turn you into the perfect utopian element that Eleanor Lamb kind of gets stuck with her mother.
Yeah.
And that whole sequence where you have to inhabit the mind of a little sister, and you see how drastically differently she perceives reality from what is really there. And because the little sisters share this consensual reality that is so very different than what you're seeing, it kind of makes you question the nature of how they function. And I liked that.
That very Changeling.
Yeah, that felt very Changeling. The little sisters, because they perceive reality so
all
differently.
Light and angels and things, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the light comes from the tummy and that whole thing. That is deeply...
It's such a depressing game, though.
I have a 7-year-old, and I played the BioShock first 2 games before she was born, and I played Infinite when she was very, very small. And I went back through and replayed the collection recently from the beginning, playing all the DLC, and getting to that scene, that sequence again, rather, where you're having to play the little sister, and it was deeply unsettling for me, particularly as a parent.
It really is. Oh my God. I play Infinite every couple of months or so, but I have a really hard time with 1 and 2 because they are just so bloody depressing.
Yeah.
Even if you, especially in 2, that happy ending thing, with all the little sisters and on the raft kind of thing, and I'm like, oh my God, this sucks.
The third game, Infinite, is much more of an action-oriented game, and the first 2 games are much more horror-oriented. The first game is more horror.
Jump out at you.
The first game is not jump scare horror.
Second one, that big sister is nasty, man.
Well, yeah, I mean it does use jump scare horror, but that's not why it's effective horror for me.
Oh.
The first game is this horror of the decay of society that everybody was so certain would make everything so much better, and very clearly it's not, but some people are clinging to its corpse. It actually reminds me a lot of the Seelys, unwavering insistence that what we're doing is the right thing, the tradition is the right way to be. And that's unsettling to me. And the second game puts you in a position where you physically are much more powerful than you were in the first game.
Oh, yeah.
But you're a slave, and you know it the whole time.
From the beginning. From the beginning of the game, they tell you are not in charge of what's going on here. You just got your little drill, and you do what you got to do.
And as you play the game, you start to uncover more of the life that you had and the person you were before. But your character doesn't really have any context for it other than these brief snippets of people having conversations about you. And it's like standing outside of your life and looking at something playing on a screen. And, well, everybody says that these things are who I am or who I was, but I can't be any of that anymore. And particularly the DLC for 2 does a lot of that. It's unsettling, and it reminds me a great deal of Changeling.
I'm actually surprised that a lot of you guys, the White Wolf folks, have played a lot of the games that I have, but quite a few that I haven't. Gravity Falls, I hear, is really good.
It's so good. There's actually another game I just thought of that has some interesting Changeling themes, and that's Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yes.
Yes.
And the pitch doesn't seem Changeling, but you have this whole augmented reality no one else can see dynamic. And so thinking about how the main character interacts with that reality, okay, it's digital, but the reality of what it is in that place and that culture is a lot like how chimerical reality, the relationship all the cultures in that game have with their past is very much how Remembrance kind of behaves. Some of the worship dynamics of what would it mean to go back and touch the Tuatha, the character kind of plays through. So I think there are a lot of Changeling themes in that game.
I've always had a thought that the Protoss from
StarCraft.
StarCraft.
Thank you. Gave me a very LV feel, you know. It gave me a much more, you know, these guys are things are not going good for them because of the situation that they're in, and anytime they have to interact with, you know, this horrible nastiness, it diminishes them as an entire race.
Oh, another couple of games I just thought of, and then we can jump on to something else.
We'll go back to
there are 3 more games. 2 of them are in the same line that I just thought of. The Evil Within series deals with consensual dreaming. Everybody gets hooked into this machine and is sharing dreams of this nightmare escape that is functionally created by a madman, and you're having to navigate within it and unlock it to understand how to survive. And you're having to delve deep into this person's traumatic past and their fears, and all the monsters that are created by the environment are reflections of his trauma and reflections of your fear imprinting itself on the environment. It's the first game does a lot of that. The second game, it involves the same main character, but this time it's personal kind of trope, where his daughter he finds out that his daughter, who he thought was dead, very Silent Hill 2, like, oh, my wife who was dead is sending me letters in Silent Hill 2. He finds out that his daughter, who he thought was dead, has been plugged into this system, and he has no idea where she is in physical reality, but maybe he can get some clues to that if he goes in and joins her digital dreaming reality.
Which one is this again?
The Evil Within 2.
Okay, all right. I got Steam open, and I'm adding shit, by the way, just saying.
If he goes in and joins her dream reality, then he can try to find her within it. And when he goes in, he realizes that there are other things in there with him, other people and other constructs of that dream that have sprung up on their own, that want to kill and eat him, that are trying to get to her and hurt her, and that are ripping the fabric of this dream reality apart. And you're kind of in a race against time to be able to find her. And by the end of the game, you realize this whole time, your wife, who you were estranged from and who you mourned your child with, actually works for the company that's doing this and put your daughter into this thing. And she is hiding your daughter from you because your relationship with her was falling apart, and she can't stand that element of reality. So she has created this perfect kernel of deep within all of these other dreams, where it's the perfect life where nothing is going to change, where her daughter loves her and she can be mommy, and daddy doesn't have to be here because I can be everything you need. And she becomes this horrific thing that is cold and calculating and the reflection of all of her insecurities and your daughter's fears that are projected onto her. And she ends up being the final boss.
That's always fun.
It was real weird and real dark.
Okay, just before we've got another question from the Peanut Gallery, but one of the it's not video game, but it's I don't know. I guess I should say it's in the general nerdy zeitgeist. Most of us, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Stargate SG-1, but there's a race of creatures called the Nox that are changeling all the way. Their power is their ability to cloak things. They're super high tech, but they live in little huts, and they have moss in their hair and the whole. That was recently. I've been binging all of the SG stuff. And that one, that particular episode popped up, and I was like, these guys are changeling. They really are. They look like elves. It's just what I imagined the she elves, not the ones that live in the forest, in the trees, and the whole 9 yards. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I personally am not familiar with Stargate, so I don't really know what I could add to that. I like the movie, but that's about all I got.
All right. The question that we have from the gallery is: so, what are Changeling's viewpoints of the other creatures in the world of darkness? Is there a particular race that they despise more than any other, and if so, why?
They tend to have problems with vampires more than anything, but not all of them do.
Why so?
Well, two active hallucinogens for vampires. So there's definitely
That's
like a there.
Self-preservation, yeah.
Yeah, and in older editions, vampires were written up as explicitly banal. Hated that.
Yeah, we don't use that.
Yeah, in C20 they backed away from that.
Oh.
The way I tend to run it is if you're dealing with a young vampire, a roughly mortal age, maybe 100, 150 years old, they're not going to be that much more banal than a human, like maybe at 150 years old. At the 500 to 600 year range, it's not about the being a vampire, it's about the set in your ways takes on a whole new meaning at 500 years.
Yeah, right. The elders get a little weird.
Yeah, the intensity of the I make them a little more banal than humans, not as banal as they were in
you
previous
cut off
editions.
on what you were saying there.
Oh, sorry about that. Am I back?
You're back. I've just said
okay.
The only part that we missed was what you were saying.
Yeah, I was. And even then, I don't make them as banal as they were in the previous editions, because they were 8, 9, and 10 on banality in second edition, and it was, except for Malkavians and Ravnos.
That was what you. I think the Malkavians is what you were saying earlier that got cut out.
I hadn't mentioned them yet. I was just talking about the being set in your ways dynamic, and no longer being dynamic, being a fairly static creature at 500-600 years old. Had all vampires as super banal before, and it was weird. And then, for the other supernaturals, the changelings don't really have an opinion. Obviously, changelings hate technocrats for reasons.
Yeah.
But the dead, werewolves,
they would get along with pretty well, I would think.
It depends.
Depends on the tribe. I get that, but
to an extent, yeah.
You'd think there'd be lots of emotion that they could feed off of a werewolf. Not necessarily positive, but werewolves are very passionate creatures, and changelings require passion. Creatures,
and that's very possible. We actually had in a game one of the PCs who instigated a romantic relationship with an NPC guru, and that got interesting because feeding off of that rage and all that comes with it got real weird real fast.
That's going to rewrite your story in a hot second.
Yeah. I like using werewolves as NPCs in Changeling games, but I don't really like mixing the chocolate and the peanut butter with having PCs like that. I have done it once in a Victorian era game, and that was interesting.
That would be a good setting for it, though.
Yeah. It was Interregnum just shortly after Jack the Ripper in Victorian England, in Victorian London. And that got interesting. We had a sorcerer, not a mage, a sorcerer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I told everybody, tell me what you want. I will try to make this work, because this was let's let the people that normally run games have a break. Let's let Sara take over for a while.
Yeah.
and it ended up being like a 10 session long thing. Like, make what you want just to kind of blow off steam. I will try to construct a world around it. Tell me kind of what era sounds interesting out of these. They chose Victorian era, and they chose a sorcerer, a she, an autumn she, and a shadow lord.
I felt that. I felt that. What the hell?
That's a lineup, man. Like,
it was actually a lot of fun because the person who was playing our Shadow Lord played a Ragabash, and he generally does.
I can buy that a little more easily.
And the person that was playing our she was playing an Autumn Dougal, who was a police officer, and
nice.
that got interesting. And our sorcerer, they wanted it to be very gritty and very street level, and so our sorcerer wanted to be part of the Asian community in Victorian London. And we had our she who wanted to be a cop. So I'm like, okay, you are working the poorest, like, bottomest of the barrel.
Wanted to be a Bobby, did he?
Yeah. You are working in the communities that are, even today, they tend to be pretty marginalized. But at that period in time, it was a whole different creature.
Oh, yeah. Not as bad as it was in the U.S., but yeah.
I don't know, actually. Yeah. I've done some reading on Victorian era London recently for a writing project. It was not good.
You're talking about working them to death on a railroad line? Come on.
Well, there's still that, actually, because at that point, I ran it right around the period in time where the underground was starting to become a thing and shelling out essentially portions of communities and having to completely destroy communities to make room for all of this to come in. And that was around the time you were still kind of getting, that was right around the time where unions were trying to maybe become a thing, and union busting meant killing people. And it dealt a lot with that. Our Shadow Lord was actually an infiltrator who'd been sent in because in my story, the Iron Riders were starting to take over. The Iron Riders are the precursor to the Glasswalkers. Because the city of London was becoming so cosmopolitan so quickly, the Glasswalkers were starting to take over in droves, and the other werewolf tribes that were represented in that area really distrusted it. And this character was sort of working as a spy to kind of infiltrate some of the Iron Rider related projects that were going through and demolishing parts of the slums to make room for the underground.
Gentrifying.
Yeah, basically. And that's kind of how they all worked together and how they all met each other. And it got interesting.
Okay, we got another question. Hunters. How do they feel? How do the changelings feel about them? And I already know the answer in the other direction.
The changelings don't particularly feel about them for the most part.
I don't know that I've ever seen a changeling text deal with hunters. And I know in Hunter the Reckoning, they gave hunters the ability to sense supernaturals. And as I recall, they do get to apply that to changelings.
Yes.
But changeling is written from the point of view of the myths are absolute. It really isn't written in a way that acknowledges that reckoning exists, actually.
Yeah.
Oh.
Changelings don't really acknowledge hunters other than, wow, that was a particularly powerful, particularly weird human that took a swing at me. But Hunter does explicitly talk about changelings, and quite a bit, in kind of referencing them as these fairy tale horrors come to life, or urban legend horrors come to life, and I'm gonna kill it with a fireplace poker because that coincidentally is made of cold iron. I remember there was actually canon fiction about that, where a hunter was hunting. He fought a werewolf that was killing, raping, and eating parts of victims, not necessarily in that order. And when he found it, he was incredibly surprised that only parts of it were furry, and that it hurt when he hit it with this fireplace poker that he happened to have to hand, and it happened to be a satyr.
Ow.
That had gone down a really dark path.
Yeah. And apparently End of the Wilderness says gentrifying can mean something very different at Lost.
Well, yeah.
That's a totally different can of worms.
Man, we only have 20 minutes left, so... But...
Yeah. I mean, the one other group, in terms of, like, talking about do changelings have an opinion on them, mages. Like, okay, they don't like technocrats because technocrats are banality incarnate.
Yeah, it's
but mages,
banality incarnate.
Mages broadly have a pretty big place in changeling lore, except changeling doesn't differentiate between mages and humans. They really view humanity's ability to weave reality as an overarching thing. Written about it is very much about mages. There's this great story in the second edition core book about the children of the star who fell, and how all these true fae nobles showed up and tried to cow them, and it was like, yeah, you're cute, but no. And these 4 children just like wiped the floor with all of these fae lords. And there's this whole thing that only humans and fairies weave reality. They're the only ones that do it. And according to Changeling, the fae did it first, but the humans do it better. The fairies are the ones who taught them how to do it. Again, that's the Changeling point of view. Specifically, salamanders are the ones that gave the fire of creation to humanity. From the inanimate point of view.
The Prometheus story, yeah.
Yeah, the salamanders are really written heavily this ideal. And while humanity isn't all that great at ripping raw potential out of, like, the underpinning of reality, their ability to take what already exists and reshape it into whatever the hell they want terrifies the Fae, because they cannot.
Yeah, I feel you. We've got an off-topic question, and most of the folks in the channel can probably put in some input into this one, but Jay Wright's asking, looking into Mage the Awakening to run a mage game, but never read any of the NWOD or the OWOD. Should he just buy Changeling, The Dreaming, and Mage version 2, or get the old books?
So, Mage the Awakening is Chronicles of Darkness or New World.
Yeah. And
Changeling the Dreaming is Old World.
Oh, I misread that. My bad. It was Chronicles of Darkness. He just didn't do it in a notation that I was familiar with. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I mean, I really wouldn't so much say that you can give a which should you get, because they're totally different games. With Mage and Mage, the systems are a little closer together than with Changeling, but really the themes of Awakening compared to Ascension are pretty different, and the themes of Lost compared to Dreaming are totally different.
As we have found out.
Yeah.
Yes. So, I hope that answers your question, dude. Welcome to the show, by the way. So, all right, we got 15 minutes left. We got some tangents to go off on here. The only information I'm getting on the Shadow Court on the wiki is from the book. The one that was written by Brian Campbell, Jackie Caseta, and Nikki Rea. So there's a lot of really cool shit. Well, not a lot of really cool shit here. But things like the Endless Winter. I guess that's the Changeling version of Gehenna or the Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Sorta, yeah. That's when glamour just kind of dwindles to such a point where it's a non-viable resource anymore. And
yeah, I mean, so with the Shadow Court and there not being a lot of information on the wiki, because they started the Shadow Court 4 times, it kind of has perpetual origin story superhero problem. Like, they never got past telling the intro story because they never liked the old intro stories, so they always wanted to try to make a new one. And I have ways of using the Shadow Court that I really like at my games, but I gotta be honest, they are 100% headcanon.
Well, that's the way. It's page 96, man. You can do whatever the fuck you want.
Well, yeah, but I mean, normally you take what's there and you play with it a little bit. I mean, like...
Oh.
But, like, with really using the Shadow Court involves taking a couple little aesthetic starting hooks and then building a whole thing yourself.
Oh, so you just went there.
Yeah. I talked a little bit about, doing the modern Shadow Court, like, kind of the way I tweak the C20 version is making them about the subversion. The other flip side of that is I tend to run the Thalane within the Shadow Court as feeding on the fear of the powerful. Because those who maintain the status quo and are powerful will always be terrified. The comfortable person that lives the perfect, pampered life, the only thing they have to fear is the mob with a guillotine that wants to take that life away from them. And so from the Thalane feeding on fear dynamic, there's something to be said for what does the creature that feeds on that fear look like. That fits the Thalane in the Shadow Court really nicely.
I need to go AFK real quick. Keep talking.
Okay. If you really, really like the kind of weird cosmological take on them, one thing that I really like doing with the concept, because it's all messy and incoherent, is have the idea that in Dark Ages Fae there were these 4 courts, and they were magically defined and saned ever in one court. And then when the Shattering happened, there wasn't enough magic to maintain those 4 courts anymore, which is seeded, to say that explicitly. So it reduced to the Seelie and Unseelie, and Changelings aren't really fully named in either court. They have to kind of draw from both to have enough essence to maintain themselves. And then the Resurgence happened, and there's a fight among the Thalane that don't want to be, and some of the darker Unseelie, to somehow dredge up enough magic to give name to a 3rd court. And part of the reason the Shadow Court is so incoherent is they don't really have enough magic to pull it off. But they're trying, and unstable. Like, I like that idea. I've never gotten to use it in a game, but it's something I've talked about a lot with other Changeling players. But yeah, all that stuff is total headcanon territory.
Gotcha.
I really liked that idea. I tend to run the Thalane as being like everybody has this intrinsic fear of the other, the thing that is not me. Whether or not that thing is, whether or not you're in a position where you're completely comfortable with your life, anything that is outside your experience, for most people, tends to be intimidating. Especially once you start ratcheting in, like, it happens to go bump in the night and want to eat your face at the same time. And I always kind of liked looking at the Thalane like that, but I like what you were suggesting. My favorite new Thalane that they introduced in C20 actually was the Weeping Whites. They are pretty much, if you've ever seen the movie Candyman,
yes,
that's pretty much that. They feed on the fears of the modern stories we tell ourselves to give context to modern problems. They feed on and turn themselves into, the ghost story of the woman that died in the car accident around that one bend, and every so often someone picks her ghost up hitchhiking. They feed on that, and they can sort of transform their form into that thing and use that to feed on fear. They feed on, I remember it being mentioned in the book, they feed on like creepypasta and things like that. And I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I really liked that. I like pulling the Thalane especially, but all of the Fae really into more modern fairy stories.
I felt like it really modernized it and gave it not just... I really like the ye olde fairy tale concept and like finding ways to adopt that in a modern setting, but I also like that there are these new stories that we tell ourselves, the let's not meet bored stuff that we listen to scare ourselves silly, and that there's something out there that's feeding on that and forming itself around that. I really liked that.
I'm noticing in the wiki every so often I'll come across something like this. It's awesome. Memorable quote from the Shadow Court book. Here now, you've only got one woman in charge and she wasn't elected? Bah, we'll soon sort that out, mate. Bogart Kith quote.
I like... the Boggarts can work. I have one that I made a while back who wasn't just like, I'm a mean boss, kind of, because that's sort of what they are presented to be. I had a Boggart that was a slumlord who intentionally bought properties and kept them in a state of disrepair and kept them in a state of decay and kept the occupants down and reaped off of their hopelessness. And eventually, when one area was becoming tapped out, she would drive it down so far that everyone was terrified and the property values were so low. That was something that she actually did with richer properties, is she would sort of influence them and drive them down to where they were so low she could buy them up and then grind them down under her heel, and when that cycle stopped working, she could go and do it all over again. I like that for Boggarts, because you're taking the home and hearth concept of Boggins, which Boggarts are sort of a reflection of, and you're making it really, really awful.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Bogarts
even
are
more
all
awful.
Well, I mean, it's not awful to begin with.
Come on, this whole situation is pretty bad, dude.
Yeah. And you don't have to be a Thalane to be a bad person. Changelings can... The way that they feed on glamour is really weird. They have so many different ways of doing it. You can muse, which is technically the quote-unquote, air quotes, good way of getting glamour, on terrible things. Musing is just inspiring something. You can inspire hate by encouraging xenophobia. Ravaging is the quote-unquote bad way of getting glamour, and what that means is that you're forcing your banality into someone else to push all of their glamour out, and you're just sucking it all up with a straw. It's damaging. It can be really harmful. But if you're ravaging hate out of somebody who is an abusive asshole, you're in theory doing maybe a good thing.
There's a story about that about these two siblings who are changelings and their father was abusive, and one of them started ravaging him because if she ravaged him, he was too despondent to abuse them and abuse their mother, I think. And
yeah, I remember reading that.
Well, and the thing that I loved about that story is, he had died, their mother had died, but she had been doing that for so many years to keep him in check. And she had taken up so much glamour from him. And when you ravage, you can also accidentally suck out some of your target's banality because of the way you do it. And of what he was inside her, that she hated herself because she hated him. And it became a story about her sister who had no idea this was going on, like having this first moment of like reconciling and trying to help her sister move past that by taking some of that glamour out of her and then putting it into herself and out of her sister. And like that whole identity, self-hatred, glamour, banality soup is so Changeling. Like that story really stuck with me probably the most out of the anthology.
That's such a cool idea. Oh, that's such a cool concept on dealing with that. Where is that? Is that one of the novelizations or?
It's in the short story anthology that was released with C20, Anthology of Dreams, on Drive-Thru RPG.
And you can actually kind of carry that dynamic and that preferential treatment of feeding method over into elements of your remembrance and elements of what kind of life are you going to reincarnate into? What kind of destiny are you going to reincarnate into? You could have been a Pinkerton and been a Union buster back when that meant busting people into pieces. And now you can be a really bad cop. And you're still carrying some of those themes. I actually have a red cap that is pretty much that. She's a SWAT officer, so that way she can feed on that frisson, that moment of fear when she busts down the door and they're looking at her in all of her tack gear and she is going to destroy them. It's like, that woman's going to eat me. You're damn right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. No dead air.
Sorry.
It's okay. No, it's cool. No, if you need another prompt, I'm here for you. All right. So we've only got about 3 minutes left, anyways, or 2 now actually, and it looks like we might be. No. Okay. I couldn't tell there for a second whether we were doing the buffering thing or not. See, we mentioned the T word earlier on, and at some point during the show, we did get a buffering issue, but it didn't last long, so we don't have to worry about that too much. Anyway, have you guys got any plugs you need to do? Like Victor, you got another Walking Away coming up soon, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely plug my podcast.
Please do.
Walking Away from Arcadia.podbean.com. We have episodes go up on the 1st and the 15th. We started over a year ago, and we've only missed one of those dates once. So, I think our last episode was on doing Changeling one-shots. That's going up is on long form games. We did them as a compare and contrast. So, yeah, and then I think the episode after that will be an interview with the developer and one of the writers from the Book of Freeholds. So I'm going to be happy when that one goes up.
Right, awesome.
I'm looking forward to that. That I really like listening to your podcast, so I'm actually really looking forward to that.
Thank you.
No problem.
So, Sarah, you got anything coming up?
I don't have any podcast or anything like that.
No, I mean games or something. You got any online games coming up, or?
I am a strange person who does everything face to face at my table.
We can't do that for everybody, no.
You mean you actually know people?
And I know people. We get together every Sunday at my house and cook dinner together. And
no
game.
Shit, that's
really
impressive. I like that. No, I do. I love that shit.
But if anybody's ever interested in talking with me about Changeling or pretty much any of the White Wolf lines, the only ones that I really don't know a whole bunch about, even though I kind of want to learn more about Wraith, I don't know a lot about Wraith. I don't really know much about Mummy, but I can talk about everything else.
Wraith and
and
Mummy. Mummy's one of my faves, though.
I'm in all of the Facebook groups with the exception of those two, and relatively active in all of them. If anybody would ever like to chat, I'm also, after our conversation about podcasts and you, Victor, trying to go, no, Sarah, you should really do something.
Well, seriously, I mean, it's not hard. I mean, and I'd be happy to hook you up with the software and everything you'd need.
Something that I'm actually interested in trying to approach is talking, because so many people are so uncomfortable with the idea of doing crossover games.
No,
and
overlap games.
Victor mentioned this earlier on Facebook today, actually, about crossover games. I really like crossover games. I think they can work really well. You can tie in the themes and maybe having a series of conversations about this is what these games mean and it's thematically in canon presentation, and this is what you can kind of extrapolate from that, and how can you make these mesh, both in terms of thematically for combat, which is kind of a practical concern for some of the lines, for political interactions. I've been considering doing something like that, and or something about Hunter the Reckoning, because so many people don't like it and I like it so much.
Well, a lot of people do like it, though. I mean, I love the idea of the crossover series for that, but there seems to be kind of a surge of I'm going to do a podcast on this game line, and I think people would get into a Hunter the Reckoning podcast.
Yeah, I can feel that. Somebody actually mentioned the same thing about Wraith that nobody did. I think it was on the White Wolf media page.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said,
Yeah, I mean, you guys have done Wraith. I would love to do a standalone Wraith podcast, but I do not.
You have your plate full.
Yeah,
you have your plate really full.
It overfloweth.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I would kind of like to talk either crossovers or do a game line representative thing, because some of the things that I really like about Hunter tend to get glossed over. It tends to be a look at, how could you make this stand toe-to-toe with whatever kind of a werewolf combat perspective on, it's a white room, you can make them face off, how does this work? And I don't think Hunter works well for that. I think thematically Hunter works very, very well as you are this tiny speck that's all alone, and you are diminished, and you will continue to become diminished, kind of like Changeling, by all of these terrible things happening around you that you barely understand, especially if you're a bystander, and especially if you're a bystander because of something that prevented you from acting, not because of your own choice of not acting. You're just stuck in the middle of these terrible things. And I like that. I
mentioned to you, you're outside of me. You were one of the few people who have been on the show who agree with me that these systems were designed to interlock with the ability to overlap. And you can put a Wraith into a vampire game or a Mummy into a werewolf game.
It's a delicate process, but it can work.
It can work, and I keep telling people that, and they keep laughing at me.
We actually, we had a Changeling game that ran very heavily into werewolf and vice versa. We had a freehold that had been founded when the balefire was lit there, brought there, a piece of another balefire was brought there. On the site that a Bane had been bound to by the Uktena in ancient times. And the Bane it couldn't quite feed on the glamour as well. It's like getting the wrong kind of food. It's not meant to eat that, but it was enough to eat that it started to wake up the tiniest bit. And now it starts to influence the person who's bound to that freehold as a caretaker years later. And we started kind of getting that into it and bringing in Bane dynamics, and it got fun.
I'll bet. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call it for the night. So, if everybody would be kind enough to say goodnight.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.